You barely even know the name of the wine. That's what he said, laughing out loud, surrounded by other suit-wearing millionaires who echoed the joke as if it were brilliant. Zelma just smiled. On the outside, calm. On the inside, cut deep. She stood there in her spotless uniform, serving with precision, just like she had for years. Just a waitress, they all thought. But what no one knew was that she spoke 6 languages fluently, that she had once lectured in Europe, that she knew every detail of that expensive bottle better than most people in the room. And that night, in front of everyone, she gave an answer in perfect German that brought the entire room to silence. But this story doesn't end there, because what happened next was even more unbelievable. In the elegant heart of Charleston, where the fanciest restaurants have names no one can pronounce and the sound of silverware feels like a symphony, worked an invisible woman. Zelma Whitmore moved through the tables with the grace of someone who knew every inch of the place, but no one truly saw her. She was like a painting in the background, nice, functional, but forgotten. Her uniform was always crisp, her hair pinned perfectly, and her smile, oh, that smile was her best armor. Subtle, measured, and steady. But behind it was a story the city could never have imagined. At 38, Zelma collected hard days like others collect fine wine. Each one had a bitter taste, a quiet origin, and a reason to keep going. She spoke 6 languages fluently, but in that restaurant, the only language accepted was submission. It didn't matter how many words she mastered. All they saw was a single role: serve. No one asked about her past. No one cared about her struggles. They just wanted the right plate, a full glass, and silence between each sip. Behind the counter, polishing silverware with care, she overheard muffled laughter. Jokes about her uptight look, her distant eyes, her barely there accent. One manager whispered, "She's good at what she does, but she's like a robot." The other laughed. Zelma heard it all, and she stored away. Not out of weakness, out of strategy. When you live through humiliation, you learn to turn scars into reserves and secrets into vintage bottles. One day, you'll choke on this, she thought, not knowing when, but sure that it would come. It hadn't always been this way. She had sat at other tables in other countries. She had served with pride and had also been served. She had tasted French wines alongside famous critics, had translated entire conferences in German and Japanese. But there, surrounded by linen napkins and crystal glasses, she was just the waitress. Just. That word stung. It was a cruel reminder that her journey had been reduced to a stiff uniform and a quiet posture. Zelma showed up 20 minutes early every single day. She checked the wines, aligned the cutlery, smiled at the chef, who rarely smiled back. She greeted coworkers who didn't always reply. And still, she stayed. Not because she had no other choice, but because she was loyal to a plan no one else could see. Life had taught her that some seeds only bloom far from applause, and that true strength lives in what no one expects. She knew the name of every wine in the house. She knew the terroir, the vintage year, the acidity, the ideal temperature. But no one ever asked. They just demanded fast service, that she remain invisible, that she never make mistakes. And when they wronged her, a shove, a rude word, a mocking laugh, she just stayed quiet. She kept it, filed it away, because sometimes silence is the most dangerous weapon, especially when you carry a secret. During her shifts, Zelma always kept a small notebook tucked in her pocket. In it, she'd jot down random words, phrases she overheard, gestures that struck her, languages she picked up throughout the day. It was her invisible journal, her way of reminding herself that she was still someone big, even while being treated like someone small. Sometimes she'd write, "You're still Zelma," like someone holding their own hand in the middle of a storm, like someone refusing to sink. Gala nights were the worst. The guests arrived drenched in perfume, loud, full of pride and arrogance. There was always one trying to show off their wine knowledge, another tossing around French phrases, usually wrong, just to impress. And then the silent ones, the ones who simply looked down on her, as if her uniform wasn't made of fabric, but of drywall. The humiliation came gift-wrapped in fake politeness. disguised as elegance, and she swallowed it quietly. Once, a wealthy woman left her a $20 tip with a little note. "You're so well trained, like a polite little pet." Zelma didn't react. She folded the note, slipped it into her pocket, and smiled like it didn't hurt. But it did, and that sentence stuck with her. Because some wounds don't bleed, they scream from the inside. She knew she wasn't a pet. She was a woman, with a story, with pain, and with a plan. Then came the invitation. A special night, a high-profile reservation, a table filled with millionaires, an event wrapped in spotlights and expensive cologne. And for that evening, they chose Zelma. Maybe because they thought she was the quiet one, the polite one, the one who would never cross the line. Little did they know that on that very night, her silence would be broken, and somewhere between one glass and the next, something inside her would finally spill over. Table number 7 had a reputation. Sharp suits, subtle jewelry, accents from all over the world. That night, the entire restaurant seemed to revolve around them. Photographers outside, discreet security guards by the door, whispers among the staff. Even the air felt heavier. When Zelma was assigned to that table, she just took a deep breath. She knew it would be a long night, and that even the tiniest mistake could become tomorrow's gossip. It wasn't fear. It was preparation. She knew the terrain. What she didn't know was that she'd be the one stepped on. Camden Rothfield was the typical loud Texan millionaire who believed money spoke louder than manners. His reputation went ahead of him. Ruthless investor, lover of overpriced wine, and a man who enjoyed belittling anyone who didn't meet his standard. When he saw Zelma approaching with the bottle, he leaned back slightly and let out a low chuckle. She caught the sideways look. She knew that look. She had seen it before, many times. The look that doesn't see people, only rolls. And in that moment, she was just a wine girl. "You barely even know the name of the wine, do you?" he said, swirling his glass like it was a crown. The words hit like a slap. The entire table laughed. Not that kind of honest laughter that comes naturally, but the rehearsed laugh of people who want to please the most powerful man in the room. Zelma didn't respond. She held her posture, her hands steady, eyes lowered, body still. But inside, an old wound cracked open. And this time it cut deeper, because it wasn't just her being insulted. It was everything she had built quietly over the years. She finished serving and stepped away with grace. The room was still buzzing, but that phrase echoed in her mind like a relentless hum. In the hallway leading to the bar, she paused for a second, leaned against the wall, and closed her eyes. "You barely even know the name of the wine," she repeated to herself, as if writing it down in her memory. The humiliation had been public, disguised as a joke, and once again, she wasn't given the right to respond. But one thing was certain, she wouldn't forget. In the kitchen, the clatter of pans clashed with the silence Zelma carried in her chest. A few coworkers noticed she was even quieter than usual, and she was already the quiet type. But no one dared to ask. In that restaurant, everyone dealt with their pain the best they could. And hers, in that moment, was being swallowed as steadily as the air she breathed. With contained rage, and a memory sharp as glass, Camden was still the center of attention, tossing French words into the air, mispronouncing them, and getting laughs like he was some sort of genius. He named wineries like he had personally toured each one, but Zelma knew half of what he said was wrong. She stood in silence when he claimed the wine they were drinking came from Bordeaux. And then, as if trying to show off by correcting a server, he pointed at her again. "Are you sure you don't want to tell us where it's from, miss?" he asked, smirking. She returned to the table, posture flawless, tray steady in her hands. But her eyes were different. There was something behind that calm gaze, something burning. Camden noticed, but brushed it off, like everyone always did. He thought that simple woman would never dare to cross a line, that she'd never have the nerve to confront him. After all, who was she? Just a waitress. Someone with no voice, no past, no name. What he didn't know was that her silence held more than pain. It held a secret. The glass was poured with precision. Zelma's fingers didn't shake. Not a single drop spilled. Camden tried to impress the foreign guests with some German. He threw out disconnected words, mixed accents, stumbled through verb tenses. The others gave polite chuckles. She said nothing. But inside, something was clicking into place, as if every mispronounced syllable Camden muttered was building the very bridge she needed to walk across. And she knew exactly where it would lead. While he laughed louder and louder, Zelma felt the moment arrive, like a switch flipping, like a door unlocking after years shut tight. It wasn't about the wine or the language. It was about disrespect, about public humiliation masked as charm, about being judged by people who only see uniforms, not humans. And in that instant, even before she opened her mouth, she already knew what she had to do. All she had to do now was wait. And that moment was just seconds away, because sometimes all it takes is one wrong sentence, one smug look, one arrogant smirk, and suddenly, everything you've held back for years wakes up. Zelma, who had spent years being invisible, was now the center of that table. And no one had a clue. No one suspected what was about to unfold. No one knew that this dinner was about to leave a bitter aftertaste for the millionaire, one he'd never forget. The dining room was packed, but in that moment, it felt like only one table existed. Table 7, where Camden's voice dominated like it was the only one that mattered. He spoke loudly, clumsily, throwing in random phrases in French, Italian, and German with the confidence of someone who thinks a black credit card buys intelligence. The guests laughed out of politeness, some embarrassed, others just bored. Zelma watched, standing by the table. She heard every mistake, every mangled word, like blades scraping across the marble of her pride. It was time. She knew. The moment had come. And this time, she wouldn't stay quiet. With the poise of someone who knows exactly what they're about to do, Zelma took a step forward. Camden's eyes locked on hers with a mocking grin. "Oh, are you going to teach us now? Give us a little wine class?" He jeered, but she didn't flinch. She calmly placed her tray on the side table, gave a subtle nod, and began to speak. In German. Clear, fluent, no stuttering, no drama, just precision. And right then, the entire room went silent. Camden's laugh vanished, and the expressions around the table changed instantly. She described the bottle Camden had been showing off like it was a trophy. She said the exact name of the vineyard, the town it came from, the grape variety, the climate that year, the soil where the vines grew. She explained how that particular German vineyard used only hand-harvesting methods, meticulous and labor-intensive, and how the wine's crisp acidity paired perfectly with the dish being served. Each word rang out like a crystal-clear piano note. And the more she spoke, the more everyone stared at her in awe. Camden seemed to shrink into his seat. She didn't just correct him. She taught him, but without arrogance, without raising her voice, with the elegance of someone who carries knowledge like heritage, not like decoration. This wine isn't from Bordeaux, Mr. Rothfield. It's from the Mosel Valley, made by a family-owned winery specializing in mineral-rich Rieslings. And contrary to what you said, the 2009 vintage didn't receive poor reviews. In fact, it was awarded 94 points by one of Germany's top critics. A heavy silence took over the table. Camden tried to chuckle, but nothing came out. One of the guests, a German man in a gray suit, looked at Zelma with genuine respect, then turned to Camden and raised his eyebrows just slightly. The discomfort at the table was palpable. An elegant kind of embarrassment passed between them, like everyone had just woken up from a ridiculous performance they had all pretended to enjoy. Camden cleared his throat, tried to speak, but she cut him off, calmly, firmly, from the soul. "The issue isn't language, sir. It's respect." Those words made the air feel heavier. The entire dining room felt it. The other tables, up until then lost in their own conversations, took notice. A few servers paused discreetly to listen. The manager stood quietly at the edge of the room. And there, in front of everyone, the millionaire, the man who thought himself superior, had no escape. His smirk faded like spilled wine across white linen. And for the first time, he had nothing to say. Zelma didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her face was calm, her mission complete. She picked up her tray, thanked the guests in German, and walked away with the same grace she had walked in with. The whispers started right after. "Who is she? Does she work here?" That was incredible. But no one dared stop her. There was something in the way she moved that commanded silence. Respect, presence, and maybe a quiet fear of what else she might know. Back in the kitchen, a few co-workers tried to hide their surprise. One of them smiled and asked, "You speak German?" She simply nodded quietly, then went right back to work, as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had shifted. Not within her. She had always known who she was. But for the first time in years, others had seen it too. And what would come after that night? No one could have predicted. Not even her. Because when someone carries a secret for that long and finally decides to reveal it to the world, the reaction is never small. Even if the applause is quiet, the consequences run deep. Zelma wasn't looking for revenge. She wanted justice. She wasn't chasing glory. She wanted respect. And that night, even in silence, the world had begun to hear her. She just didn't know yet how far her voice would reach. The manager had never been a kind man. He was the type who barked orders into his radio, walked fast just to look busy, and rarely looked anyone in the eye. But something about him seemed different that night. For the first time in 8 years, he called her by her full name, Zelma Whitmore. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" He asked, trying to keep his usual tone of authority, but clearly unsettled. She hesitated, wiping her hands on a dish towel, then followed him to the tiny back office. Her heart beat fast, but her face remained calm. The room was cramped and slightly stuffy. Stacks of papers, an old computer, and a stained chair. Nothing about the space was welcoming, but the conversation that began there was. "What you did out there was incredible. I had no idea," he admitted with a strange sigh. For the first time, he seemed human. Zelma didn't answer right away. She sat down slowly, folded her hands, and looked at him with calm. It felt strange to be in that room, actually being listened to. Stranger still to realize that the man in front of her was finally paying attention. With a soft, almost whispery voice, she began to tell her story. "My mother came from Germany, alone, with a suitcase and a small daughter. My father was a dock worker. He died when I was 13. I learned English the hard way, working at markets, delivering newspapers. At 16, I got a scholarship to study abroad. I went to Frankfurt, studied linguistics, spent 7 years there, learned to speak, to interpret, to teach." She spoke slowly, not out of weakness, but out of respect for her own journey. Each word was a brick in the wall she'd built with great effort, and that now, finally, someone was seeing. Zelma took a deep breath and continued. "I came back to the U.S. in 2020. The pandemic had wiped everything out. All the translation gigs were gone. Companies shut down. Events canceled. I found myself with no ground beneath me. And this restaurant took me in. I needed work. Had bills. Debt. Rent to pay." The manager just listened. For the first time, without interrupting, without rushing, as if he knew that moment couldn't be measured by time. And there, in that tiny office, Zelma stopped being just a waitress. She became what she had always been, a whole woman. She talked about the nights she cried while washing glasses, the days she nearly quit from exhaustion, the time a customer yelled at her for serving wine at the wrong temperature, even though it was right. She talked about the tips that never came, the harsh words, the whispers she pretended not to hear. But what hurt most was the invisibility. "Speaking 6 languages was never enough for them to see me," she said, looking him straight in the eyes. That sentence hung in the air like a breath no one could let out. The manager swallowed hard, tried to smile but couldn't. He was sitting across from a woman he had known for nearly a decade, and yet he realized he didn't know her at all. He felt small, useless, like a fraud in the presence of a story far bigger than him. He wanted to apologize, but couldn't find the words. So he just said, "Thank you for staying." Zelma didn't answer, not out of coldness, but because some wounds, even when acknowledged, don't need praise, they need change. And that change was still a long way off. In the hallways, the energy had shifted. The smiles were different, the stares more thoughtful. A few co-workers approached her with curiosity. "Did you used to work with wine? Are you a teacher? Did that German guy know you from somewhere?" Zelma answered with short gestures, never showing off. She wasn't looking for a spotlight. She wanted respect. And in that moment, she could feel it slowly, quietly, starting to come, like a light rain after a long, dry summer. Gentle, silent, but needed. Late that night, as she left the restaurant, Zelma walked the streets of Charleston with her head held high. The breeze brushed her face softly, as if the wind itself had something to say. She passed a wine shop window and smiled at a bottle from the same vintage she had served that evening. She remembered Camden's expression, the guest's silence, the restrained applause. It wasn't glory, but it was justice. Subtle, quiet, and that was enough. When she got home, she sat at the table with her notebook, flipped to the page from the night before, wrote just one sentence. Today they saw me, then closed the notebook, got up, and walked to the window. The city was asleep, but something inside her was wide awake, something that had been dormant for far too long. And now, it wanted space, a voice, a path. Zelma didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt ready. Because sometimes, the greatest transformation doesn't happen in front of a camera or on a stage. It happens in the quiet of a back office, in the weight of a single look, in the courage to tell your story for the first time. And that story still had much more to unfold. The next morning, the restaurant's phone rang before they'd even opened. It was an international call. One of the businessmen from Table 7 wanted to speak to the manager. On the other end of the line was the man who had quietly watched Zelma the night before, the one who had been stunned by her fluency, her poise, her depth. I'd like to invite Ms. Whitmore to an event in New York as our lead interpreter, fluent in both German and English. The manager, still processing the impact of the previous night, nearly dropped the phone. Zelma, someone's calling for you. And this time, it's not to serve. He called her into the office and repeated the offer, his voice still a bit shaky. Zelma listened carefully. She didn't rush to answer. Her eyes, calm as ever, held the weight of someone who knows the depth of her own story. New York, huh? She murmured. It wasn't just a trip. It was a restart, a leap, an invitation that didn't come by chance. It came from real recognition. Still, she asked for time. I want to think it through. I don't want to act on impulse. I've done that before, and it cost me. While she was still thinking it over, a delivery guy arrived with flowers. A fancy, fragrant bouquet. The card was signed by Camden Rothfield. Forgive me. I didn't know who you were. The sentence was short, but Zelma read it over and over. Of course you didn't, she thought, because you never bothered to ask. She folded the card neatly, tossed the flowers in the recycling bin, and went back to her shift. No drama, no relief, just the certainty that respect can't be bought with apologies, let alone with expensive roses. Later, Camden tried calling. He wanted to talk, to explain, to say he felt bad. But Zelma declined to call. I'd rather be remembered for my competence, not for your guilt, she said, firmly. There was no anger in her voice, just clarity, resolution. Because when a woman survives what she has survived, she learns to tell the difference between remorse and responsibility, guilt and accountability, kindness and true repair. And in that case, she wasn't looking for applause. She just wanted to be left in peace and free to choose her next step. The news spread quickly. Some coworkers looked at her with admiration, others with thinly veiled envy. But Zelma remained the same. She still woke up early, still rode the bus, still studied in her free time, still cared for her ailing mother with patience and devotion. And even when invited to prestigious events, she continued to wash glasses at the end of her shifts, not out of necessity, but out of loyalty to herself. She understood. Real success begins when you no longer feel the need to prove anything to anyone. In New York, the international event awaited her. A massive stage, booths for simultaneous translation, leaders from tech, gastronomy, and tourism industries. And at the center of it all are Zelma Whitmore, former waitress, former invisible, now recognized for her rare talent of bridging worlds through language. The woman once silenced by arrogance was now translating ideas that connected nations. Her voice was heard with intent, her knowledge in demand, her name finally respected. And as if that weren't enough, after her presentation, she was approached by a renowned California winery. They wanted her as a cultural training consultant for their sommelier program. They wanted her sensitivity, her technical mastery, and most of all, her story. You represent everything our audience needs to understand. Wine isn't just in the glass. It's in the journey of the one who serves it. Zelma smiled. That sentence was more than a compliment. It was the confirmation that, yes, wounds do heal. And once they heal, they become internal medals. Back in Charleston, she made one last visit to the restaurant. She brought her notebook, a bottle from the 2009 vintage, and a small note for the manager. Thank you for finally listening to me. She left without saying goodbye to everyone. A few people caught a glimpse of her walking out, head high, eyes shining in a way they hadn't seen since her first day. She was no longer the silent waitress who took everything quietly. She had become something else. A reference, a living reminder that the world can be cruel, but it can also recognize those who never give up. On social media, her story began to spread. A blurry, amateur video filmed at the restaurant had captured part of the moment when she answered Camden in German. The issue isn't language. It's respect. The phrase went viral, got translated, printed on T-shirts, painted on university walls, and people all over the world were commenting, "This woman represents me." Because deep down, all of us have felt invisible at some point. And watching someone like Zelma win feels like we're winning a little too. Like this video if her story touched you. If you've ever felt underestimated too. Subscribe to the channel for more real and inspiring stories. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know.